Every day, millions of people wake up with the same weight on their chest. They drag themselves out of bed, look in the mirror, and sigh, as if they are trapped in a life they hate, a suffocating routine, relationships drained of meaning, a job that consumes the soul. And yet, they carry on. Every step, every choice, every silence, everything repeats, as if there were no alternative. But is there really none? Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher, presented one of the most disturbing and difficult to accept ideas of modern philosophy. Human beings are condemned to be free. In other words, no matter how much you try to deny, rationalize, or dramatize your circumstances, in the end, you are always choosing. Even when you decide to do nothing, even when you claim that you have no choice. This is where the concept of bad faith comes in, developed by Sartre in his work, Being and Nothingness. Bad faith is the sophisticated and unconscious self-deception we use to pretend that we are passive victims of a world that oppresses us, when, in fact, we are co-authors of our own imprisonment. Bad faith is when you say, "I have to stay in this job because I have bills to pay," as if there were absolutely no other possibility. It's when you assert, "I can't end this relationship. I've invested too much in it." Ignoring that continuity is also a choice, and that any investment can be abandoned. Bad faith is, above all, the mechanism that protects us from the unbearable anguish of recognizing that we are free. The problem is that this protection comes at a cost, our very happiness. The more you lie to yourself saying that you can't change, the further you distance yourself from who you really are. And the greater the distance between what you live and what you wish to live, the deeper your unhappiness becomes. This video is a direct confrontation with that dissonance. A philosophical, psychological, and existential analysis of why so many of us are trapped in lives we say we hate, yet paradoxically continue to choose. Sartre does not offer easy consolation. He does not believe in magical solutions or comfortable excuses. His proposal is brutal. You are absolutely free, and this freedom is a burden you try to avoid every day. But there is something liberating in this brutality. Because the moment you recognize that everything you live is the result of choices, conscious or not, you also discover that you can, at any moment, choose differently. The pain of being where you are is real. But the truth that needs to be faced is this: you are not trapped. You are choosing to stay. And perhaps by understanding this, you will finally begin to walk the path of real freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre not only described human freedom, he illuminated it in such a raw light that it became almost impossible to ignore. For Sartre, the human being is an unfinished project, a being condemned to continuously reinvent itself, without excuses, without external justifications, and without a predetermined destiny. This is the essence of his thesis of condemnation to freedom. Contrary to what many think, Sartre does not say that we are free as a romantic privilege, but as an inevitable burden. Freedom for him is not a gift. It is an ontological condition. Even if we try to hide, it is always there, latent, demanding that we make choices. When he speaks of being for itself, Sartre points to the unique capacity of human consciousness to perceive itself as distinct from the world and the things around it. We are, simultaneously, what we are and what we are not yet. We are what we project ourselves to be. And it is precisely this consciousness that condemns us to a painful paradox. Nothing in our past or in our current personality guarantees that we will follow the same patterns as yesterday. We can, at any moment, act completely differently, and that is terrifying. This vertigo, which Sartre calls anguish, does not come from an external fear, but from the internal recognition that there are no limits to our freedom beyond those we choose to impose on ourselves. It is in this chasm between what we are and what we could be that bad faith is born. We pretend not to be free so that we do not feel the vertigo of that freedom. We invent stories that we are trapped by circumstances, by others, by fate, or by society, because it is easier to believe in the illusion that we are puppets than to face the fact that we are holding the strings all along. It is much more comfortable to live believing that there is no alternative than to take radical responsibility for every decision, including the decision to remain where we are. This understanding is uncomfortable because it destroys the victim role that many of us assume. It holds a mirror in front of us and shows that behind every "I can't," there is a "I don't want to pay the price." Freedom is total, but it is not free. Every choice implies loss, renunciation, and risk. That is why, even hating a life, so many people continue to choose it. Because the familiarity of prison seems less frightening than the abyss of freedom. And it is precisely at this point that the key to understanding our own unhappiness lies. When Sartre says that we are condemned to freedom, he is not punishing us, he is unmasking us. By stripping away our justifications and excuses, he forces us to see the power that has always been in our hands, but that we insist on denying. However, understanding this truth is only the first step. It is also necessary to examine the illusions we build to sustain this self-deception, the stories we tell ourselves to justify the life we say we hate. And that is what we will see in the next part: the illusion of lack of choice and how it manifests in our routines, relationships, and daily decisions. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The most paralyzing illusion of modern existence may be this: that we are trapped in a life we did not choose. It is common to hear phrases like, "I have no choice," "I can't leave this job," "I can't end this relationship," "I can't change now." These statements, repeated to exhaustion, seem to describe an objective reality, almost unquestionable. But, according to Sartre, nothing could be further from the truth. These phrases are not truths, they are escapes, and behind each of them lies an active choice that someone is trying to deny. Sartrean bad faith operates here almost surgically. It convinces us that we are hostages of circumstances to protect us from the panic that comes with the realization that we are free. When someone says they need to stay in a toxic job because they have bills to pay, what they are really saying is that they choose financial security over the uncertainty of change. When someone remains in an emotionally abusive relationship and justifies it by saying it's complicated, they are choosing the comfort of the known over the emotional risk of separation. There is no moral judgment here. There is only the philosophical observation that all permanence is ultimately a choice. The trap lies in how we tell ourselves these stories. We do not say, "I am choosing this suffering because I am afraid of the alternative." We say, "I have no way out of this." This inversion is what sustains the illusion. Language betrays us. We come to believe in the lie itself, and the lie transforms into subjective reality. We begin to live not based on what is, but based on what we have decided cannot be different. This is how the prison is built, not with concrete walls, but with narratives. Sartre argues that even inaction, what we call doing nothing, is a form of action. When you remain silent, you are choosing silence. When you postpone a decision, you are deciding not to decide. There is no escape from freedom. And this is precisely the hardest point to accept. You are where you are because you chose to be there. And you will remain exactly there as long as the pain of staying is less than the fear of changing. Of course, not all choices are easy, and not all alternative paths are clear or simple. But the central issue is not about ease, it is about responsibility. The price of change can be high. It requires facing challenges, losses, sacrifices. But the cost of denying your freedom of continuing to live a life you claim to hate is infinitely greater. The erosion of your integrity, your self-esteem, your sense of identity. For Sartre, the chronic unhappiness that many experience is not caused by external circumstances, but by the dissonance between the life they choose to live and the narrative they maintain to avoid taking responsibility for it. It is an internal conflict between what one lives and what one believes they deserve to live. And this dissonance comes at a high price: anxiety, resentment, apathy, aimless anger. But the good news is that this mechanism can be exposed and dismantled, and the first piece that needs to fall is precisely this paralyzing belief that there is no choice. Because once this illusion dissipates, the question changes. It is no longer, can I change? The question becomes, am I willing to pay the price of change? And this is exactly what we will explore next: the confrontation between the price of changing and the cost of staying, and why most people only change when the pain of continuing becomes unbearable. The human being is an excellent storyteller, especially to oneself. We create narratives not only to make sense of the world, but to justify what we have already chosen deep down. We say we are exhausted, unhappy, without purpose, that we can no longer endure this life, but in the next moment, we continue living exactly the same way. Sartre draws attention to this brutal contradiction, the gap between the story we tell about our lives and the reality of the choices we make every day. This dissonance is not innocent. It is the central mechanism of bad faith. On one side is the narrative: I have no choice. I am forced to live this way. On the other are the concrete actions: waking up, wearing the same clothes, going to the same job, staying in the same relationship, repeating the same habits. Dissonance sets in when language separates from action, when the mouth says, I am a prisoner, but the body continues to silently obey the routines of the prison. And this contradiction does not go unnoticed by consciousness. Quite the opposite. It accumulates silently, like an internal tension that manifests in various forms: insomnia, apathy, irritation, demotivation, addictions, existential crises. The individual begins to live a subterranean war between what they feel and what they tolerate. And the more this war intensifies, the more they convince themselves that they are losing control when, in fact, they are merely reaping the effects of years, sometimes decades, of incoherence between discourse and practice. Sartre argues that this dissonance is not only psychological but existential. The human being, when acting in disagreement with their freedom, breaks their own inner unity. They become a divided being, a being that lies to itself, that observes itself as if it were another, that distances itself from its own authenticity. And this division comes at a very high price: the loss of meaning. How many people live like this, saying they want to change but sustaining all the actions that keep everything exactly the same? They want freedom but fear the consequences of exercising it. They want to be happy but avoid the discomfort of breaking with the familiar. They want to be authentic but continue to play roles that should have been abandoned long ago. The cruelest part is that, over time, this dissonance normalizes. Suffering becomes the backdrop. Discomfort becomes routine. Dissatisfaction transforms into identity. The person begins to define themselves by what imprisons them. I am anxious. I am unhappy. I am insecure. As if these states were natural, immutable, essential, as if they were them. But Sartre cries out against this resignation. What you are is what you choose to be. And if you continue choosing something that denies your own desire, then that is what you will be. Not by fate, but by decision. And perhaps this is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Your unhappiness is not a mistake of the universe. It is the result of the life you continue to choose to live. There is no divine punishment, bad luck, or external conspiracy. There is only the absence of real responsibility for the choices one makes. But what if, instead of fleeing from this, you faced this dissonance head-on? What if you recognized, with brutal honesty, that everything you are living is a direct reflection of your choices or the lack of courage to change? This is the turning point. And it is about this that we will talk in the next part. The moment when the cost of staying exceeds the fear of changing, and how this redefines everything. Every real transformation begins with a collapse, not a visible collapse, but an internal, silent, almost imperceptible one. It doesn't happen when you read a motivational quote, nor when someone tells you that you deserve more. It happens when, finally, the pain of continuing becomes greater than the fear of change. Sartre understood this with brutal clarity. Human beings only move when permanence becomes unbearable. Before that, everything is rationalization. Everything is postponement. That's why so many people live in limbo, between constant suffering and postponed change. An existential space where discomfort is chronic but still bearable, where days are repetitive but predictable, where unhappiness is manageable. And as long as it is possible to manage the pain, human beings will postpone facing freedom. Changing, after all, has a price. And it's not a small price. It involves losing. It involves breaking ties, abandoning habits, shattering constructed images, disappointing expectations, dealing with others' judgment, facing the unknown. Change requires mourning. The mourning of the version of yourself that you have sustained for years, even if it was built on suffering. Sartre does not romanticize this transition. For him, changing is an act of radical courage. It is to acknowledge that you are the only one responsible for what comes next. There are no guarantees. There are no promises. There is only the leap, the abyss of choice. And that's why so many people prefer to remain trapped. Not because they love the prison, but because they fear what exists outside of it. But what is rarely said, and what Sartre hints at, is that permanence also has a cost, and in many cases, that cost is infinitely greater than the price of change. The cost of remaining in a life that denies your innermost truth is the silent corrosion of the soul. It is the sickness of identity. It is the existential weight of living below what one knows to be possible. Staying where you are is not neutral. Time does not stop. Vital energy does not recycle itself. Stagnation is not a static state. It is regressive. Each day you choose safety over growth. You weaken your own potential. Each "not now" becomes a disguised "never." And when you realize it, years have passed, and the only thing that has accumulated is regret. That's why the most important moment of the existential journey is the instant when the pain of staying finally surpasses the fear of leaving. It is at this point that the mask of bad faith begins to crack. The lie of "I have no choice" starts to lose strength. And a new question begins to emerge, still timid, still fragile, but impossible to ignore. What if I have been free all along? This question does not bring immediate relief. On the contrary, it brings vertigo. Because accepting that you are free also means accepting that you are where you are because you chose to be. And even more, that you can leave at any moment if you are willing to pay the price. But what happens when you face this freedom head-on? What changes when you stop waiting for a sign, a permission, or the right moment, and understand that everything has always been in your hands? This is what we will talk about in the next part, the true Sartrean freedom, and why you are already free, even if you insist on feeling trapped. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The idea that you are already free, right now, at this very moment, is one of the hardest truths to accept. And precisely for that reason, it is one of the most powerful. For Jean-Paul Sartre, freedom is not a distant possibility, conditioned by external factors, money, emotional support, or ideal timing. Freedom is the fundamental structure of being human. You are free not because you have earned that freedom, but because there is no way not to be. Even the act of denying that freedom is, in itself, an expression of it. It seems paradoxical, but it is not. When someone says, "I am trapped in this life," what they are really saying is, "I am choosing not to pay the price of change." Every feeling of imprisonment that does not involve handcuffs or physical walls is, at its core, a comfortable choice, a decision camouflaged as inertia. You may not be aware of this. You may even swear that you would like to change, but as long as you do not take action, you are exercising your freedom in the most passive way possible, choosing to wait. Sartre goes even deeper by stating that even passivity is a form of action. By not acting, you are making a choice, the choice to abstain, to keep everything as it is. And the most disturbing thing is that no one can make that choice for you. Not society, not your parents, not your boss, not your partner. You are solely responsible for being where you are, and you're also the only one with the power to leave. This kind of total responsibility can be suffocating. It is easier to believe that we are waiting for the right moment, or that life will change when X happens. But all of this is carefully constructed distraction to avoid the weight of knowing that life is in our hands. Because when you truly understand this, there is no one left to blame. And most people simply are not prepared for this kind of freedom. But why so much fear? Why do we choose the pain of stagnation over the uncertainty of movement? Because true freedom requires sacrifice. It demands renouncing the comfort of the known, giving up the victim role, abandoning the old narratives that justified our paralysis. And above all, it requires responsibility for everything, for the mistakes, for the failures, for the successes that did not happen because we chose not to act. That is why Sartre said, we are condemned to freedom. There is no escape. Even when we pretend to have no power, we are exercising power. Even when we say that we have no choice, we are, in fact, choosing. Freedom is an inevitable condition. And precisely because it is inevitable, it does not bring comfort. It brings weight. A weight that can crush or liberate, depending on what you do with it. But here is the turning point. The moment you stop resisting freedom, everything changes. When you abandon bad faith, face your fears, acknowledge your excuses, and accept with brutal honesty that the life you live is your responsibility, you become, in fact, free. Not because something magical happened, but because you stopped lying to yourself. And it is at that moment that real transformation becomes possible. Because when you take on your freedom, you also take on your power. And where there is power, there is possibility. But this freedom only becomes real when accompanied by action. Because knowing that you are free changes nothing. What changes everything is what you do with that freedom. And that is what we will talk about in the last part. How to transform awareness into action, and why you will continue choosing the life you hate until the pain of staying outweighs the fear of living a new one. The greatest trap of existence is not in suffering itself, but in the human capacity to get used to it. The mind is incredibly adaptable. It transforms discomfort into routine, pain into habit, and unhappiness into identity. And as long as the pain is bearable, as long as it is possible to keep breathing even without enthusiasm, surviving even without joy, you will continue choosing the life you say you hate. This is the most brutal indictment of Sartre's philosophy. There is no external force sustaining your stagnation. What exists is your silent agreement with a reality that no longer serves you, but still seems safer than the abyss of change. And as long as this agreement remains, transformation does not happen. Because all real change requires a break, and a break requires pain. You will only leave where you are when it becomes unbearable to stay. When the discomfort of living on autopilot, of repeating empty patterns, of ignoring your authenticity, finally becomes greater than the fear of breaking away from all of this. And that breaking point, despite seeming painful, is the true opportunity. It is there that the vital impulse for change is born. It is there that you stop negotiating with your cowardice and begin, for the first time, to commit to your truth. But it is important to understand, recognizing all of this is not enough. Freedom by itself does not transform anything. It only becomes real when accompanied by action. It is no use just intellectually understanding that you are where you are by choice. You need to act as someone who knows this. You need to start making decisions, no matter how small, that express this freedom. You need to change your rituals, your automatic responses, your unconscious cycles. Bad faith only loses strength when you act responsibly, when you stop telling the story that you cannot and start behaving like someone who chooses. This transition is internal, silent, but absolutely transformative. There is no easy path, but there is a path, and it begins the moment you stop fleeing from yourself. The life you say you hate is sustained by small decisions, repeated every day. And it is precisely in them that change begins. You do not need to turn your life upside down all at once. But you need to stop lying that you are not choosing. Freedom is a fact. Transformation is an inevitable consequence for those who have the courage to live it. Now, I want to hear from you. What is the hardest choice you have been avoiding? Comment below. Because putting this into words is the first step to breaking the illusion. And if this video confronted you, made you think, or touched you in some way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this truth. And it doesn't stop here. The next video is important and will take you even deeper into this process of self-knowledge and breaking away. Keep watching. You are not alone on this journey, and the search for truth is just beginning.